I'm Matt Wilhelmi. I'm the owner of Strategic Voyages Business Consultants. I'm also the author of Taboo Business Questions, What's Haunting Every Entrepreneur's Growth. And today I'm really excited because I'm joined by Lindsay Britt. Lindsay is a fractional CMO. She also has an MBA from Duke University, specializing in marketing. And she specializes in supply chain SaaS and marketplaces that typically deal with, kind of two sides of the house. And so I'd love to introduce Lindsay to our audience.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you too. I think, we were kind of getting ready for our call. We went over a couple of different details about your background, but one of the things that I was really interested in kind of diving into is your experience with CINC. As a fractional executive, a lot of times you have some really interesting stories that kind of helped propel you and give you that authority in marketing in your case. And so I'm wondering if maybe you could give our audience just a little flavor of, your time at CINC and maybe how it went and what'd you do there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined CINC as kind of the third marketer at a director level. I'm reporting into kind of the chief product officer or product marketing officer. And when I was there, I grew the team from 2 to 6 people, started off being advised by a private equity company. And we really were targeting smaller real estate teams. And then we wanted to hit this huge $100 million ARR growth goal and get acquired. And so we expanded into larger real estate teams and even had something for mortgage brokers as well. So while I was there, repositioning the brand to not be known as something for small real estate teams. So I led a rebrand effort and really positioning us as the content leaders and thought leaders in the space on how real estate teams can grow their businesses. So we were truly partners with those real estate teams. And that building that community really helped drive that growth. So like Matt said, I was there for a successful exit. We were acquired by Fidelity National Financial when I was there. So being able to experience that whole process, seeing the before and after, I was there for about a year after the acquisition, seeing how the sales and marketing functions shifted and grew. So helping to create the BDR function and what that looks like, and how do you go to market when you're going after a mortgage broker, which is very different from a small real estate team or even an individual real estate agent, and how we looked at the different margins from each of those different products and businesses to figure out which ones we're going to really push our growth to where it needed to go. So yeah, it was fascinating to just be around a company that grew so quickly.
Yeah, so CINC, it's spelled CINC for anyone who maybe wants to Google it. As you were kind of in that company as an employee, you did get to kind of see, probably a lot of change, and you got to see kind of a lot of your work get implemented in a very exciting way. You talked about growing a team and a successful exit. And so I would guess that a lot of those skills and experiences now translate into maybe the work that you do for other clients, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. That was the first time I'd really managed a team as well. I had smaller teams at different companies that I worked in the past for smaller projects, but it pushed me to define what type of leader I wanted to be, really trial and error on how and of things to do and what not to do. Also just I was surrounded by a lot of incredibly smart people who allowed us to test things and try things out. So I learned through trial and error, but also had kind of that leadership and guidance on some things. So yeah, it was a great experience to really then apply all those skills and the lessons I learned to my current clients now, but even the multiple companies I worked at after that.
So, you mentioned this time period of a year kind of after the acquisition, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of people who go through acquisitions kind of forget, that that's a big piece of the puzzle, that an acquiring entity is going to want that stability and that transition time to be thought of as a value add. And so I'm wondering if maybe you could bring us into kind of what was that like that year after the acquisition?
Admittedly, it was rough because the CEO that I think was really rallying all of us left after the acquisition. And so he was really the face of the company, and the new leadership had been at the company before. It wasn't that they were brand new, brought into the company. And so we knew them, and they did a great job. I think there was just a shift in, okay, now we have these really large goals, and there's pressure from this company who acquired us to see the success that they expected. And I think there was a little bit of tension where they could bring the company who acquired us, they could bring in their people if the people at CINC weren't up to snuff, essentially, or weren't meeting the numbers that they wanted. So there was that tension there. At the same time, we had huge resources that we hadn't had before, opportunities to go to events and conferences and access to much larger customers than we would have had in the past. So it was just a lot of change. So there's a lot of change management going on. And then people really deciding, okay, this is the new CINC and kind of what it looks like. I'd say at the core, we were the same, but in a lot of ways it was different. So you had people deciding, do I stay now or do I go? Is this the fit? Is this what I want to see and what I want to continue, where I want to continue to work?
Yeah, thanks for kind of explaining that. I think sometimes when I'm working with clients, I do tend to work with clients as a fractional CFO, on the financial side. If they are interested in acquisitions, the questions typically come up about kind of what life would be like after the acquisition is done.
Mm-hmm.
Some people think that they're just going to get this humongous check and then sail off into the sunset and never to be heard from again. That's just not really how it works. It could be, but I think a lot of businesses that are in the acquisition industry want that steady, continuation of leadership, whether it's from the CEO or from the CMO or some of those other C-suite level positions. They do want to kind of see that there's going to be some continuation. And so they could bring in their own people, but I don't think that that's usually their first inclination.
No, definitely not. I mean, they acquired the company because it was doing well and there was success there. And what drove that success was the people. So yeah, they absolutely wanted to keep people on. Now, obviously they could come in, and if there are certain areas or departments where they could see opportunities for improvement, they may have their opinions there. But that, I think, like you said, they acquired the company for a reason. It was doing well. So.
Yeah. So I think, that experience, Lindsay, I bet you could, probably talk a lot more about that and how it certainly relates to what you're doing these days as a fractional CMO and managing your different clients and kind of adding a lot of the different skill sets that they need to kind of scale their business. But the conversation today, and the reason that I wanted to bring you in to the talk here, is more on the marketplace side of, your specialty. And so I'm wondering if maybe just for a moment, you could maybe explain what a marketplace is for anybody who's watching this video and maybe isn't quite familiar with the term.
Yeah. So a marketplace is essentially where you have a supply side and a demand side to your business. So I want to just give an example of one of the first marketplaces I worked for. It was a mobile app that connected consumers with local farmers to have food delivered to their door. So it's similar to, think about an Uber or an Airbnb. You have the side where you need to source the local food from the farmers. And so some of your customers are the farmers, but then on the other side, you have to build the demand side, which is on the customer side. And the customers are actually going to buy that food. And typically a true marketplace doesn't hold the inventory. It's just a connector essentially between the supply and the demand side. And it can get a lot more complicated with 3-sided, 4-sided, 5-sided marketplaces. But I'd say the majority of them are 2-sided marketplaces. So from a marketing perspective and business perspective, it's a little bit more challenging because you can figure out the demand side and then something's going on with the supply side. So you just have to, it's a little more complexity.
Thanks for the background there. I think, when we were kind of discussing, the case study before this call, you used the term marketplace, and I did have to ask for just a little bit of clarification because I don't know how many CFOs think of it that way. Maybe more do than I know, but in my mind, it's more of a brokerage. It's more of an exchange of ideas or an exchange of services, and kind of, again, creating a marketplace. But, this opportunity that I had to work with a finance company in Florida came to mind. And when I was brought in, they needed help with a valuation model for their business. And so my team and I met with some of the executives. We poured through their financials, did all of the typical spreadsheets and pivot tables that you would guess that a CFO would do. But I wanted to bring this up because they were essentially trying to raise capital for a bank, but the reason that they were doing so is because they wanted to get their financing a little bit cheaper than what they were doing historically. And so in this particular company, a big piece of their business, I think you said it's called the supply side, they were getting their funds from corporate partners. And I don't think they were really good at it, but I'm hoping that maybe you can, shine a big spotlight on maybe some of the issues that they have in their strategies and in the way that they do it. But how would you approach, a company like that maybe has, some known issues on the supply side in their marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to know. It's nice that they have a good idea of where the challenge is with their growth, that it's on the supply side versus the demand side. And you really, when you're joining a marketplace company, it's nice to be able to focus. So I appreciate that we can focus on the supply side. So one of the first questions, just to make sure we're clarifying what the kind of the issue is that they're having a little bit of trouble with their lead generation and their pipeline on the corporate partner side. So one of the things I'd first want to know is, do they know who their ICP is, their ideal customer profile? Do you know if that's defined?
I bet that if you were to ask them, they would say yes. But from my observations and hearing about their issues, I would say no. I think, and this is maybe what we'll get into in a little bit, the need to have that clarified is so important. It kind of lays the groundwork for everything else. And so if you don't have, the ICP clearly laid out, that's your ideal client profile or ideal client persona. Some people call it either one, but your ideal customer, if you don't know who that is, then you can't really do much else. And so what they thought their ideal client was really kind of any mid-market company with a checkbook that was willing to give them money. They didn't really have much defined beyond that.
Okay. Yeah. So that's definitely an area to focus on for sure. And then one of the things I also want to get at is, do they actually have product market fit? So how many current clients or customers do they have? And are any of them what you kind of call raving fans, where they would gladly go out of their way to tell other people without even being asked about the success that they're having or working with your client as a partner?
I don't know if they had any raving fans. I think they had some reluctant fans. I think that the owner of the company was really skillful in being able to, leverage his relationships from college. He went to Harvard. And so just had this like massive network of really influential business people. And so just really kind of leveraging that network to get people to give him more money. But I'm not sure that any of those people were then referring their friends and family or contacts. So it certainly wasn't probably as deep as you would like to see.
Okay. All right. And then we talked about this a little bit, but looking at the sales rep quota attainment rate. So how many of the sales reps are actually reaching their quota? And is that something that's actually attainable?
Yeah. So I think, from a traditional sense, the sales rep attainment rate is something that you would want to know and you'd want to kind of dial into and really have a clear understanding. Unfortunately, with this business model, their supply side was really kind of driven by only the partners in the firm. And so there was about a half a dozen of those individuals. And so they didn't really even probably consider themselves as sales reps. They were more partners in the firm that would, make these relationships and then introduce, those people to the CEO, who would then kind of go through his spiel. And so they didn't really have a good metric around that. I think it was not as structured as probably you would like to see.
Okay. So it sounds like it was still very much founder-led sales.
Okay. Yeah. And I'm actually kind of curious, Lindsay, like if you could maybe, I don't know if you have like the stat on the top of your head, but like, is that often? Does that happen very frequently in the marketplace business model?
I don't know if it's unique to the marketplace business model per se, but it's very, very common for startups to start as founder-led sales. I mean, that's not uncommon at all, but making that transition and freeing up the founder to run the business or do other aspects of the business where they thrive, especially as you scale, because at a certain point, the founder can't do all the sales. They can still very much be, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess the main person that represents the brand. And so they can continue to bring in interest that way. And you can always bring in a founder to kind of close larger deals. But if you want to scale, you have to have some kind of sales motion that isn't specifically driven by the founder eventually, but it's not uncommon at all.
Yeah, because I think some of the companies that I've worked with, the founders are very influential. They're very charming. They have a way of kind of being able to tell stories and link it back to the value that they bring, and it's just very, very compelling. It's tough to kind of translate that and have other reps do that. The ones that can do that are typically very, very successful, but that's not every founder.
Yeah, for sure. And that kind of goes back to the main question of, is there product market fit? Is it not, are people only buying because of that founder or because they see a lot of value in the actual offering?
So you've asked a couple of questions about, kind of their structure. Did you have any other questions that you typically ask when you're going through this kind of process?
Yeah, I'd really like to know, there are two more if we have time for it, kind of the current churn rate for the current customers or the corporate partners that they're bringing in. How long do they stick around?
I'm wondering if you could maybe define that a little bit further. I mean, I know what the definition is, but maybe just for our audience, like, how do you define churn rate?
You set a specific time frame. Let's say you have a year of how long a current customer stays on, and the churn rate is how many of those customers leave and they're no longer customers.
Okay, so that's maybe more of thinking like a monthly recurring revenue model, right? Where they're like, okay, so I don't know if these corporate partners were necessarily recurring. It was maybe more of a one-off sales. I think a few of them probably did more than one, chunk of investments, but I don't think they even had kind of a monthly process set up for that.
Okay, may not be relevant to that business. That makes sense. Okay, and then the last one is, do you have an idea of any marketing campaigns that they've done? And if so, what their most successful one was?
Not on the supply side. I don't think that they really did a lot of marketing. I mean, they had a corporate partnership program, but they weren't marketing it. It was, talk to the founder. I mean, that was kind of their marketing.
Okay. All right. Those are the main questions I have, at least as a starting point.
Yeah. So, now that you've kind of gone through a handful of questions here, Lindsay, I'm wondering if maybe, the wheels are starting to turn a little bit with what the strategies would be that you'd talk about, and maybe, how you would guide this type of company. But maybe before we get into that, is there any sort of like way that you would maybe summarize what their issues are? I mean, just from the frank answers to the questions, I have some ideas of maybe how we could label these issues, but how would you kind of, if you were taking notes in a business meeting, like, what would you say their top 3 issues are?
Definitely defining the ICP for sure. And making sure, and having that well-defined and accepted across the organization. And then looking at the marketing in general, it's not necessarily, it's not scalable to just rely on the founder network. And so I would want to talk to them about, okay, you have these 6 people who are helping to bring in the current corporate partners. Let's think about, do they have a set quota? Are they held to a certain goal or OKR for defining that success? And then really diving into that. If not, how do we set up that structure to motivate them? And at that point, decide, is that enough to scale the business, or do we potentially need to bring in more people or different people to kind of do the sales aspect of it, or even just a BDR type of function potentially? Because it sounds like it's all outbound. And then there is no real marketing. So where can we start, and how can we start to create more of an inbound function?
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. Thank you for that. When I'm sometimes talking to a new client or potential new client, I do have my kind of list of questions as well. It's very different from yours, but I think that, the information that I glean from that is so valuable because it gives me a very deep insight into some of the other issues they might be facing. But I do try to kind of summarize, what I hear so that they can kind of get some agreement, before we jump into solutions. I don't think it's probably the best way to go about it if you don't gain some buy-in along the way from the people you're talking to. And so I appreciate you kind of running through those. I wrote them down. So let me see if I got them right here. The first issue you mentioned was that there really isn't a clear ICP, and it's not really accepted throughout the organization. The second one was kind of a lack of a process around the sales cycle, and there's no accountability to really numbers. It's all founder led. You mentioned that. And then the third one is there isn't really even like a real marketing strategy being done. So those are three issues that I would imagine, like if you're talking to a company, are probably not unusual, right? Like you've seen these issues before, you've dealt with this before, you're not surprised that these are the issues.
Correct.
And so, as we kind of get into some of the solutions in our third episode, I just wanted to kind of take a moment though to say in our second episode, we're going to talk about some cautionary tales. And I'm really excited about this, Lindsay, because in our second episode, you've given me just a taste of what some of the cautionary tales are that you have run into. And so I just wanted to kind of tease our audience a little bit. The first one was, kind of what happens when you're targeting the wrong ICP and what impact that has on the organization. The second one was, and we'll get into this more, like I said, in the second episode. The second one is the impact behind inconsistent messaging. When you're having those inconsistent messages, it doesn't just, it's not just a surface issue. There's some deeper issues there. So I'm looking forward to unpacking these cautionary tales in our second episode. Again, I'm here with Lindsay Britt. She is a fractional CMO, has her MBA from Duke University, specializing in marketing, and works really, really closely with supply chain SaaS companies and those companies that have a marketplace format. And so stay tuned for our second episode.